Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. A certain Patreon supporter and fan of this channel has been commenting in almost every video that he wants to see us do some special forces, real-life special forces versus Star Wars special forces. Now we finally figured out a way to do this video. Now we don't really get a lot of information about Star Wars special forces because, well, they're special and they're usually off doing special things. But we do have enough information about certain special force groups and their missions to be able to compare them to actual special forces we see here on Earth. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to take Star Wars special forces and finding their real life equivalents here on Earth. Now we're going to be mainly focusing on US military and government assets, so I apologize for that beforehand for our international community. It just simplifies things a little bit. We were first introduced to Inferno Squad in the Battlefront 2 main campaign. There was also a novel that came out as well. I highly recommend it if you want more information about Inferno Squad. The novel starts off during the Battle of Yavin 4. Senior Lieutenant Iden Versio was a TIE fighter pilot that participated in the defense of the Death Star and was far enough from the station to have survived its destruction. Unfortunately, the blast did disable her TIE fighter and she had to crash onto Yavin 4. She eventually made it back to Imperial lines, where her father, a newly promoted admiral in the ISB, was assembling a special team. The Imperial Security Bureau is basically the Federal Bureau of Investigations we have here in the States. But because the Empire basically covers the entire galaxy, the scope of the ISB's mission is far more all-encompassing, so maybe it's best to say that the ISB is kind of like a mix between the FBI and the CIA, with a healthy dose of Gestapo and Communist Political Officer Corps. Admin Versio gathered Iden Versio along with 3 other special operatives from various backgrounds, including a stormtrooper who was also an engineer, a naval intelligence analyst, along with a naval officer. Together they formed Inferno Squad, specifically created as a reaction to the growing threat that was the Rebel Alliance. While in Battlefront 2, Inferno Squad functioned more like a small commando unit or a direct action team. In the beginning, Inferno Squad was mainly focused on highly sensitive covert operations. Their first mission was actually to go undercover within the Empire to expose a corrupt Moff. Their second mission was to go deep undercover in what remained of Saw Gerrera's partisans. This was a longer mission and Inferno Squad had to create effective covers to infiltrate the group. Iden Versio underwent a very humiliating and public treason trial to distance herself away from the Galactic Empire. This was an extremely high-stakes operation and the ISB agents were under deep cover and had no contact with the ISB. They had to blend in very carefully with this violent terrorist organization and were even forced to help them carry out terrorist attacks. Were they caught, their existence would be completely denied by the Galactic Empire. The closest thing we have in the United States would probably be the CIA Special Activities Division's Special Operation Groups. This is the branch of the CIA that carries out paramilitary covert operations. Special Operation Group team members are oftentimes deployed in plain clothing without any identifying badges or clothing. If caught in certain operations, the United States can and will deny ever being involved. Like Inferno Squad, the CIA Special Operation Group teams recruited from different branches of the military and look for a wide assortment of skills.
I can tell you I don't have money, but what I do have are a very particular set of skills.
It should be noted that CIA operatives most likely wouldn't go undercover in a group like a terrorist organization. They would just use informants. A real-life operation that the CIA operatives did take part in would be Task Force Dagger. This was immediately after 9/11. They were amongst the first US operatives to be dropped in Afghanistan, and they made contact with Northern Alliance Mujahideen who were fighting against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Now, the Clone Commandos are probably my favorite organization in the entire Grand Army of the Republic. They were popularized by the Clone Commando game and novel series that I seem to talk about every other episode. But then when Disney took over, they became legends, but then the Clone Wars brought them back to canon. It's confusing, but they now are canon and official. These soldiers were genetically altered to be superior to the standard clone soldier. They were heavily equipped with modular blasters, which could be refitted to many different configurations, explosives, and Katarn armor, one of the toughest armors in the Star Wars galaxy, only outclassed by some true Mandalorian Beskar armor. The clone commandos were usually deployed in small 4-man teams. They were mistakenly used in larger operations as shock troops during the Battle of Geonosis and suffered high casualties. Where they really shined was in special operations missions that used small units. They were proficient at guerrilla warfare, CQB, direct action, target extraction, all sorts of special ops missions. They were basically the go-to unit for any mission that Jedi strike teams weren't available for. Sometimes they also went along with Jedi strike teams and served as security. The Clone Commandos share similar responsibilities with the Army's Delta Force and Navy SEAL Team 6. Like Delta Force, the Clone Commandos oftentimes operated right around the limits of what the Galactic Republic considered lawful behavior. When the Republic eventually turned into the Empire, many of these clones would defect and go to Mandalore. The Clone Commandos that were left were tasked with hunting down the remaining Jedi generals and were one of the few Special Forces units actually up for the task. By the Battle of Endor, the Rebel Alliance, with the help of former Imperial commandos like Crix Madine, had organized a Special Forces unit known as the Pathfinders. These were small infiltration teams that specialized in guerrilla warfare that took over Imperial installations. General Han Solo led one team during the Battle of Endor to capture a shield generator, and another team under the command of Alliance intelligence officer Cassian Andor stormed the Scarif data facility in a suicide mission to recover the first Death Star's plans. The Rebel Pathfinders were essentially light infantry units that were highly mobile and used that mobility to capture certain strategic points behind enemy lines. Because they usually operated with very little support, they could only hold these points for a short period of time. Without reinforcements, they would run out of ammunition or be overwhelmed by responding units. These rebel units were named after similar World War II units, which were also called Pathfinders. These were individual soldiers who most famously landed in Normandy prior to the rest of the airborne paratroopers and set up beacons to guide C-47 transports to their drop zones. Now, Rebel Pathfinders functioned in larger units than the Pathfinders of World War II, but they weren't quite as large and well equipped as an Army Ranger company, and they definitely weren't as specialized or as well trained as Marine Raider units. If you really think about it, the Rebel Pathfinders are pretty under-equipped and under-trained and lack the fire support that most US Special Forces would have. One could argue that they aren't actually Special Forces, but more like an irregular force not all that different from the Viet Cong, using guerrilla tactics and their mobility to quickly strike larger, more technologically advanced forces and then quickly fading into the jungle when they encounter resistance. Next up, we have the Death Troopers, the elite soldiers of Imperial Intelligence, not to be confused with the ISB. Imperial Intelligence focused less on treason and political ideology and more on intelligence gathering and analysis, so it's kind of more like the NSA. But unlike the NSA, the Imperial Intelligence also has its own security wing. I say security forces and not agents because that's what the Death Troopers were. They didn't do intelligence gathering, surveillance, or reconnaissance. Their main job was focused on asset protection, whether that be a kyber crystal or important Imperial officials. The Director Krennic used the squad of Death Troopers like his personal bodyguards, but they really weren't anything special in combat, although they did manage to shoot some rebels in the back while they were running away during the Battle of Scarif. As a matter of fact, they weren't even that good at asset protection either. Saw Gerrera and a few rebels were easily able to overpower a unit guarding a giant kyber crystal. The Death Troopers, despite their terrifying name and impressive armor, aren't really actually combat units or specialized for direct action missions. Their duties were more similar to that of groups like the Diplomatic Security Service, which provides protection for the Secretary of State and US ambassadors. You might remember seeing these guys in 13 Hours, that film about Benghazi. The Death Troopers also had similar responsibilities to the Air Force Nuclear Missile Corps, an organization that maintains and protects nuclear launch facilities across the United States. You might have heard about them losing a box of grenades in North Dakota earlier this year, or heard about the airman who admitted to dosing LSD while on duty protecting a missile silo. For those of you who are familiar with the Clone Wars period, the ARC Troopers or Advanced Recon Commander was a familiar sight. While not technically a Special Forces group, these individuals were definitely assigned to specialized missions. In Legends, the original ARC Troopers were made from unaltered Jango Fett DNA. This made them better and more aggressive fighters than the average clone. In canon, ARC Troopers weren't different genetically from your average clones and were usually promoted through the ranks after distinguishing themselves in combat, like Fives did during the Battle of Kamino. But instead of being Special Forces, the ARC Troopers were more like specialized officers that also were attached to normal infantry companies. They had several different duties that related to training other clones, including the first wave of clone Commandos. Their combat missions also widely varied depending on who they were deployed with. Most of the time they would lead platoons or squads in the middle of larger battles. They were kind of like specialized hero units, or maybe leaders of specialized assault squads. Similar to when Navy SEAL snipers assisted the Marines during the Battle of Fallujah, or when Delta Force operators fought alongside Army Rangers during the Battle of Mogadishu. Other times, ARC troopers were attached to Jedi strike teams and helped them on specialized covert missions to rescue hostages or sabotage separatist installations. These are also the same type of missions that Delta Force SEAL Team 6 and MARSOC would take on in real life. The ARC troopers were also used to help train indigenous forces to resist separatist aggression. This is reminiscent of the foreign internal defense missions that Green Berets and MARSOC undertake in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. So as you can see, the ARC troopers basically did a little of everything, which is exactly what you would expect from a serialized TV show. In real life, the jobs that the ARC troopers did would be accomplished by several different specialized units, but because it's a TV show and it'd be confusing to introduce new special groups every episode, they basically had individuals like Captain Rex do it all. Nonetheless, the ARC troopers are pretty cool and they are quite unique to the Star Wars universe. So guys, those are the real-life equivalents to Star Wars Special Forces organizations. Let me know in the comment section below which one you like the best. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.